There was a time, far back in the forgotten folds of time, when humanity was but a fearful whisper in the vast savage symphony of the world. Before cities, before writing, before we even recognized ourselves as human, we walked, or ran rather, through landscapes inhabited by creatures so colossal, so fearsome, that our daily survival was counted among miracles. Those were the days of the giants, a ferocious age when being small meant living on the edge of extinction. This isn't just a tale of prehistoric beasts. It's a story of primal courage, of instincts honed like obsidian blades, of tribes who faced not only the fangs and claws of relentless predators, but the very shadows of fear. On this narrative journey, we'll unravel the chronicles buried in fossils, the legends carved in bones, and rediscover an era where the true monster wasn't always the biggest. On the vast plains of East Africa, more than 2 million years ago, the wind swept across the grasslands with an ancient murmur. It was a world of vast, borderless skies, but every corner concealed a threat. There, among the shadows of ancient acacia trees, moved a small, upright being, timid but curious, Homo habilis. It had no claws or fangs, its body was small, fragile, with no obvious defenses, but it possessed something no other creature had yet, the spark of intelligence. The life of Homo habilis was a race against death. A child who reached the age of 5 was a lucky prodigy. One who reached 12 was a legendary survivor. Diseases infiltrated every wound, food was scarce, and water often led directly into a predator's ambush. Without medicine, without fire, without solid shelter, each day was a desperate gamble to keep breathing for another night. But something drove him not to give up. In his trembling hands, the promise of the tool shone. Crudely hewn stones, simple but lethal in their context. With them, he not only defended what little he had, but also dared, on occasion, to challenge the natural balance. Not as a hunter, but as a timely thief of remains, a scavenger by necessity, a spectator of death, a witness to a constant brutality that silently shaped his mind. He often climbed trees to escape, spending hours among the high branches, observing. Like a sentinel of fear, he learned to read the sounds of his surroundings, the rustling of leaves, the buzzing of insects, the distant footsteps of a threat. It wasn't a dignified or glorious existence, but it was life. And with each life saved, the spark grew. He learned. He evolved. At night, as the stars pierced the dark blanket of the sky, the roars of cave lions sealed the terror. Homo habilis, wrapped in darkness, hugged his group, his children, knowing that dawn was no guarantee. But every night survived was a triumph. Every new day, a second chance. And so, unwittingly, these tiny hominids were writing the first pages of a titanic story. A story of rebellion against nature, of defying the impossible, of the slow transformation of fear into strategy, and of instinct into knowledge. But what lay ahead was not mercy, but an even greater challenge, the rise of a true colossus of evolution. Do you dare to continue walking alongside them? The danger has only just begun. The dawn of a new species brought with it not only stronger bodies, but also more dangerous ideas. Homo erectus wasn't content to simply survive. He wanted to conquer. His silhouette was taller, his legs longer, his eyes sharper. He walked with purpose, not fear. And in his hands, fire, that living red creature that changed everything. They no longer just watched the flames in natural fires. Now they summoned them, tamed them, and with them, rewrote the rules of the game. Fire didn't just illuminate the night, it transformed the raw into nourishment, the cold into shelter, the wild into control. Where Homo habilis once climbed a tree to hide, Erectus planted a fire and drew an invisible circle that predators feared to cross. That burning frontier wasn't just warmth, It was nascent civilization. It was claimed territory in the darkness of the world. With fire came strategy. The nights grew longer, stories were born around the flames, and with them, collective memory. They learned to wait, to ambush, to organize. They no longer relied exclusively on luck to feed themselves. They used rudimentary spears, sharp stones, and coordinated shouts. Hunting was not an impulsive act. It was a brutal choreography. In the Olorgesailie Basin, in what is now Kenya, the bones speak volumes. Fragments of Therapithecines, giant primates with blade-like fangs, lie split in half, bearing clear tool marks. This wasn't a natural catastrophe. It was a systematic slaughter. Groups of Homo erectus ambushed, surrounded, and hunted together. Their prey was no longer just any animal. They were the kings of the savannah. And yet, that daring came at a price. The clashes were bloody. Mistakes cost lives. The world did not bend easily. Predators still prowled. Lions, giant hyenas, land crocodiles lurking in the rivers. Death still breathed down the neck of every hunter. But for the first time, the fear was mutual. The fascinating thing is that in those camps, among the remains of broken bones and worn tools, one also finds signs of care, healed bones, elderly people who lived longer than expected. What did that mean? That they cared for their wounded, that they were beginning to see value beyond brute strength. Something new was born, compassion. As Homo erectus lit fires and carved stones, he also ignited a deeper flame, the flame of humanity. But in that same fire burned an older, darker desire, to dominate not only the environment, but everything that moved within it. But they didn't know yet that the true titans of the world were just beginning to awaken. What creature would dare challenge the fire hunter? The answer awaits in the next stage. Deep in the savannah, where the bushes mingled with deceptive shadows and the wind whistled in warning, something was moving that even Homo erectus feared to name. It wasn't a lion, nor a hyena, nor even one of the crocodiles that waded in the rivers. It was older, quieter, more calculating. It was Therapithecus oswaldi, the titanic ape. Not just any primate, but a monster of muscles and fangs that ruled the land like an uncrowned emperor. Imagine a baboon the size of a leopard, with canines so long they could pierce bone, and a mind astute enough to plan its movements. It didn't hunt for hunger. It hunted for territory. They formed tight groups, disciplined like armies, capable of surrounding an enemy and mercilessly destroying it. For Homo erectus, encountering one wasn't a hunting opportunity, it was a death sentence. And yet, they hunted them, perhaps out of desperation, perhaps out of pride. The remains found at Olorgesailie tell the tale. Dozens of young individuals, skulls shattered by direct impacts, bones splintered by stone tools. It was no accident, no carrion. It was a deliberate hunt. Humans were willing to risk everything to prove that the world no longer belonged to beasts. But how did they do it? It wasn't strength, it was calculation. They observed the Therapithecus' habits. They knew where they drank water, when they slept, which paths they traveled. And there, on those repeated routes, they hid, they waited. Some acted as bait, others as a wall. And when the creature fell into the trap, it fell like a dethroned god, amid primitive spears and war cries. Every victory was celebrated, but not without cost. The infected wounds, the human losses, the bodies that never returned to camp. It wasn't just hunting, it was war, an ancient war between instinct and strategy. And to win it, more than courage was needed. It required memory, legacy, shared learning. Little by little, each confrontation left its mark not only on the land, but also on people's minds. Children grew up hearing stories of defeated giants. Old people recounted fatal mistakes. And in that cycle, tradition was forged. Not written in stone, but carved in blood and silence. Because whoever forgets how to hunt the monster becomes its dinner. But Homo erectus had yet to see the worst, because beyond the mountains, at the edge of the unknown, awaited a beast that not only walked like a god, but ran like lightning. And when he appeared, the ground shook. Are you ready to meet the true titan of solid ground? Then don't look back. In the south of the ancient Australian continent, where the shadows were denser than the sun and heat rose from the ground like an ancient breath, lived a creature that seemed to have sprung from a hunter's nightmare. Its name would be lost for millennia among fossilized bones, but when modern archaeologists unearthed it, they shuddered. They called it Quincana, the land crocodile, a predator that didn't swim, it ran, and it did so faster than many humans could imagine. The Quincana didn't glide silently through the waters like its modern relatives. It stood on strong, bowed legs, lifting its body off the ground like a deadly bipedal reptile. It measured up to 6 meters in length, weighed over 400 kilos, and could catch its prey in full sprint. It was the master of dry land, a scaly specter with curved claws, back-set teeth, and a fixed gaze. Where Homo sapiens tread cautiously, the Quincana stalked with hunger. Its jaws were steel traps. Unlike other crocodiles that caught and dragged underwater, it tore with teeth similar to those of carnivorous dinosaurs. Each bite was a farewell. It could tear off entire chunks of flesh in seconds. For the first humans to arrive on the Australian continent, the surprise was brutal. They expected paradise. They found a hell dressed in scales. In the first hours after their arrival, the tribes realized something was hunting at dawn, something that left no visible footprints, but traces. Severed remains, paths cut short by violence, children vanished in the mist. Shamans spoke of the monster that never sleeps. Hunters drew its silhouette on rocks. And so, unwittingly, they began to record the history of their enemy. Humans could not defeat it in strength, speed, or ferocity. But they possessed one gift no monster could: patience. They learned to forge false paths, to build camouflaged ditches, to breathe fire where the creature sought shade. Not every confrontation was successful, but each battle taught something new. And so, slowly, the tactic of man against the Titan emerged. On many occasions, clans preferred to migrate rather than confront it. The Quincana dominated not only the body, but also fear. Its mere presence altered routes, transformed customs, and reorganized the human ecosystem. But within that pressure, something crucial also arose: adaptation, the need to understand, to anticipate, to imagine the invisible. Because if Homo sapiens couldn't match the Quincana in brutality, then they had to surpass them in ingenuity. And that leap, that moment when the human mind rose above animal muscle, was the true beginning of their ascent. But the age of monsters was far from over, and what crept silently through the bushes would make the Quincana look like a mere shadow. Do you dare to meet the dragon who reigned without wings? The next chapter will reveal. Just when humanity thought it had known horror in the form of the land crocodile, the ground itself seemed to open up to reveal something even more fearsome. It didn't rise from the waters, nor did it fly among the trees. It walked slowly, but with a certainty that chilled the blood. It was Megalania, or as the elders would later call it in fearful whispers, the dragon of the end of the world. A colossal lizard that didn't need wings to spread panic. The Megalania was no myth, even if its description alone sounds like something out of a legend. It reached almost 8 meters in length and could weigh up to 2 tons. It was a distant cousin of the Komodo dragon, but surpassed it in size, strength, and, likely, ferocity. With muscular legs, a whip-like tail, and a forked tongue that probed the air for prey, it was a methodical hunter. Its curved teeth were designed not to capture, but to tear. In the forests of prehistoric Australia, this reptile ruled like an invisible emperor. It slithered through the undergrowth without arousing suspicion, pausing for hours waiting for the right moment. And when it struck, there was no warning. Victims died not only from their wounds, but from the venom it injected. Yes, like the modern Komodo dragon, the Megalania was probably venomous, a cocktail of toxins that prevented clotting and plunged the body into slow agony. The first humans to face it were unprepared. At first, they believed it was a shadow, a spirit, a curse sent by the gods. Then, when they began to find corpses split in half, they understood it was something more earthly, but no less monstrous. Nomadic villages changed course at the slightest sign of its passage. Certain hills and valleys were avoided. Rituals were established to appease it, dances that attempted to distract its fury. But nothing calmed the Megalania. It hunted by instinct, by hunger, by dominance. Its size allowed it to attack even large animals, and humans were just another option on its menu. It didn't need packs or strategy. It was its own army. Every footstep it took was marked on the earth like an ancestral warning, and every encounter with it was a page written in blood in the collective memory of the people. Despite the terror, some dared to face it, the bravest, the most desperate. They used long spears, fire, and deep traps. It wasn't enough to wound it. They had to weaken it, tire it, drive it into unfavorable terrain. Surviving stories speak of entire nights spent organizing the entire tribe for a single ambush, because they knew that killing the dragon wasn't just about surviving, it was about claiming the right to remain. And although it eventually disappeared, perhaps due to climate, perhaps due to human pressure, its legacy remained in legends, in bones, in fear. Because even today, when one walks through certain lands in the Australian outback, some swear they hear a whisper among the rocks, the echo of Megalania. But if you thought dry land was the only place of danger, wait until you look down into the water. In the next stage, death awaits, submerged, silent, and with its mouth open. Where the river curves like a sleeping snake and the lakes reflect the sky with deceptive calm, that is where the true silence of death lurks. Beneath the still glass of the water, a pair of eyes barely emerge, motionless, patient. It is not a reflection. It is Palimnarchus, the ancient crocodile, older than dreams, more lethal than any land predator, a creature that didn't chase. It waited, and when it moved, it was too late. Unlike the Quincana, which ran across the earth with reptilian fury, the Palimnarchus dominated the liquid realm. It was enormous, reaching over 5 meters, with a body that seemed carved from stone, a jaw that closed with the force of thunder, and camouflage that made it a part of the landscape. For prehistoric humans, drinking water was like Russian roulette. One false step, one broken branch, and the water erupted in violence. There was no time to scream. The victims were dragged underwater with such brutality that only bubbles, foam, and the dull sound of a skull breaking remained. The tribes began to fear water as much as fire. Mothers taught their children not to go near it alone. Shamans marked the shores with ash and symbols, as if that might deter the monster. But Palimnarchus respected no superstitions. He responded only to instinct. Over generations, tactics were developed to detect it. Long poles to measure mud, torches lit on docks, dogs barking at its scent. And yet, it continued to claim lives. It didn't matter whether it was night or day. Its patience knew no bounds. It could wait hours, days, even weeks, until its prey grew complacent. And then, without warning, it emerged from the abyss like an ancient god demanding tribute. The devoured bodies were beyond recovery. Only remains floated. Broken bones, scattered limbs, or simple bloodstains staining the shore. But it was more than physical death. It was a collective trauma. People began to see monsters in every wave. in every shadow that rippled underwater. The songs became mournful, the rituals more desperate. The Palomnarchus didn't just hunt bodies, it hunted peace. But even in the midst of terror, Homo sapiens learned. They understood that they could win not with strength, but with ingenuity. Platforms were built over the water, fake baits were thrown, diversion channels were dug, and so, little by little, the hunter was understood, not tamed, not defeated, but at least read like a dark book. And that act of reading the enemy was, perhaps, the first step toward scientific thought. Because with each plunge of the beast, the human mind also plunged into the unknown. And in that brush with death, something new was born, understanding. But not all threats hunted from below. Some descended from the sky, fluttering with the fury of the primordial winds. Prepare to look up. What falls from the sky isn't always rain. There was a time when looking at the sky brought not comfort, but panic. On the vast prehistoric plain, under skies so open they seemed endless, a shadow could change everything. It was no cloud, no ordinary bird. It was Genyornis newtoni, and although it didn't fly, it stood with a presence that eclipsed even terrestrial predators. But even more fearsome were its ancestors, the terror birds, living remnants of an avian lineage that refused to surrender to the new age of mammals. These creatures, descendants of Mesozoic predators, didn't sing at dawn. They didn't forage for seeds or insects. They hunted, with axe-like beaks, powerful necks, and muscular bodies designed for ambush. They were the feathered version of panic. Their sharp, cold eyes spotted the slightest movement in the undergrowth. And when they ran, they did so in whirlwinds of feathers and death. Imagine being a prehistoric child gathering roots, barely crouching among the bushes, when a shriek pierces the air, and a dark silhouette, nearly 3 meters tall, appears on the horizon. There are no more trees nearby. There's no more time. The Dromornis, with its giant strides, reaches you in seconds. You don't need to be devoured. A sharp blow, a slam with its massive chest, is all it takes, and the world fades away. That's how many disappeared, without a trace, without a final cry. The tribes learned quickly. Where these birds nested, silence was the law. Forbidden territories were marked with red stones, warnings were conveyed in dirges, and cloaks of branches were woven to blend in with the surroundings. It was a war of invisibility. Whoever showed themselves died. The hunters weren't always humans. For thousands of years, they were simply the best at hiding. And yet, over time, the narrative was reversed. The meat of these birds was coveted, their eggs a delicacy. Their feathers served as ornaments, their bones as tools. Hunting one of them was a feat worthy of legends. But it wasn't done with weapons, it was done with cunning. Digging traps, dividing the flock, distracting the dominant male. It was theater, it was risk, it was a dance with death. Sometimes, a young warrior was sent out alone, at night, on a mission to steal an egg from the central nest. If he returned alive, he was acclaimed. If not, he was mourned as a martyr. Initiation rituals were intertwined with hunting. Because more than killing to eat, one hunted to belong, to ascend, to cease being a child and become history. Fear was proof, courage a passport. And so, amid feathers and blood, Homo sapiens began to rewrite its role in the world's theater. It was no longer just prey. It began to choose its battles, to decide when to run and when to stay. But while the war raged on land and in the sky, another challenge was brewing in the thick branches. Because not every enemy roars or strikes. Some attack from above, with silent claws and eyes that see in the dark. Do you dare to climb the trees? Then prepare yourself. What lurks above doesn't give second chances. In the gloom of the primordial jungle, where the sun's rays barely touch the ground, amid the tangles of branches and vines, Life wove with a distinct rhythm. Here, in this green and damp cathedral, every leaf was a hiding place, every shadow a potential ambush. The trees offered not only fruit and shelter, they were war zones, because there, amid the whispering of the treetops and the crackling of the branches, hid assassins with sharp eyes and razor-like claws, tree-dwelling felines, stealthy reptiles, birds of prey that struck like lightning upon the unsuspecting. The first humans to venture into these regions believed they had escaped the terrors of the savannah, but they soon discovered that the threat was more than just one face. The primitive leopard, more agile than its modern descendants, hunted silently, watching for hours from a branch, moving like a liquid shadow until it was just a leap away. It didn't roar, it didn't run, it simply fell. Like an inevitable doom, human young were the favorite target. Small, vulnerable, easy to carry. The mothers slept with their arms tense, with dry branches around them to hear the slightest creak. The men surrounded the raised camps with torches and guards, but still, disappearances happened. A muffled cry, a snapping branch, the beating of wings or the fleeting brush of a tail, and then nothing, only emptiness. The canopy absorbed its own as if the jungle had a hunger of its own. There were also the giant pythons. They didn't attack with speed, but with patience. They coiled around the branches like plant ornaments and waited. They could remain motionless for days until an unwary person leaned in the wrong place. Then, the rumble, a single movement, a brutal contraction, and the human body became a silent package, squeezed between rings of muscle. But not all threats were visible. Some arrived with the subtle buzzing of an insect, with the tiny bite of a spider hidden in the bark. The jungles were full of poisons, of invisible biological traps. A single bite was enough to make the body burn from the inside, for the muscles to contract in spasms and consciousness to slowly fade, wrapped in sweat and hallucinations. Shamans learned to read the symptoms, to seek out roots and leaves that would fight death with death. Still, humans didn't flee. They learned to live there, to listen for the sounds that preceded danger, to distinguish between a bird's song and a predator's warning. They adapted. They built elevated platforms, retractable ladders, and nets that cushioned falls. They used the canopy as an ally. They made it their home, their shield, their trap, because if the enemy was high above, they too would learn to climb. And so, climbing ever higher, Homo sapiens demonstrated that no territory was forbidden. Not the water, not the earth, not the sky, not the jungle. Every step, every branch conquered, was a new verse in the song of their survival. But on his way up, the human would encounter something even more disturbing. Not a fanged or clawed monster, but a reflection. Another being, bipedal and cunning, that breathed like him, hunted like him, and watched him from across the fire. Prepare yourself, for what is coming is no beast. It's kin. There is no creature more disturbing than one that resembles us, one that doesn't roar like a lion or slither like a snake, but rather breathes, thinks, plans, and observes us with the same eyes we use to look at the world. In a dusty corner of prehistory, when the skies were still unwritten and the earth shook beneath bare feet, Homo sapiens encountered his most disturbing reflection. Other hominids. They weren't the same, but they weren't so different either. The encounters were neither epic nor ceremonial. They took place in the dimness of a shared cave, in the confluence of a river in the dry season, in the echo of strangers' footsteps among the stones. First, there was curiosity, upright bodies, skillful hands, long gazes. Then, tension. Because where one drank, the other also longed to be satiated. Where one hunted, the other had already left their footprints. The world wasn't wide enough for two species that wanted the same thing. everything. Among the most notable was Homo neanderthalensis, as robust as an oak tree, with prominent eyebrows and hands that could shred a branch as if it were paper. But he was no brute. He cared for his dead, painted on walls, and created tools that still fascinate archaeologists today. In Europe and Asia, sapiens found him already established, master of the land, of winter, of silence. But there was no surrender, because sapiens brought something that the Neanderthal did not: complex language. Metaphor, myth. It's said that the first conflicts weren't caused by violence, but by fear. Groups avoided each other, leaving signs to avoid crossing paths, like animals marking their territory. But instinct is treacherous. Soon came misunderstandings, suspicions, ambushes. A cave burned, a hunter killed with a different kind of spear. And then, the eternal cycle: fear, attack, revenge. The first war wasn't about land or gold. It was about genetic survival. It wasn't all bloodshed. Some groups mingled. Genes don't lie. Today we carry Neanderthal fragments in our cells. But the alliance was short-lived. Sapiens advanced like a slow but steady wave, and the rest disappeared. Some without a trace, others with vestiges scattered among stones and ashes. It wasn't a sudden extermination. It was a silent extinction, a forgetfulness built day after day, generation after generation. And yet, Homo sapiens didn't celebrate. Because by eliminating his closest relatives, something broke. The world became lonelier. The fire no longer had reflections, only elongated shadows and memories. And although Homo sapiens reigned, something from that ancient morning remained etched in his soul: the certainty that he is not the only one who can think, and that intelligence, by itself, does not guarantee compassion. From then on, the stories changed. They no longer spoke only of beasts and storms, but of distant tribes, of others like us, different, dangerous, fascinating. But that wound didn't stop sapiens, because the conquest of the world was just beginning. And beyond the sea, a continent awaited, filled with creatures so strange they would make even the worst of monsters seem familiar. Prepare to cross oceans. The next territory would defy all logic. When the first groups of Homo sapiens dared to look beyond familiar horizons, they saw something no ancestor had imagined: a vast, inhospitable, and unprecedented land, Australia. Separated by seemingly impassable oceans, its shores brimmed with mystery. No one knew what awaited them there, but what they found was no Eden. It was a living catalog of the improbable, creatures that defied logic, life forms that seemed to have sprung from a divine delirium. There were no elephants or lions. Instead, giant kangaroos leaped like moving towers. No wolves or bears, but Tasmanian devils shrieking with the fury of 1,000 knives. The birds were enormous, some flightless, others ready to defend their nests like soldiers. And beyond, crouching in the dry scrub, were carnivorous marsupials, like the dreaded thylacoleo, creatures with jaws so powerful they could split a skull with a single bite. The first humans to land didn't come with metal weapons or armor. They came with stone spears, sun-tanned skins, and imaginations as sharp as an obsidian knife. But that didn't save them from awe. Every sound in the night was new. Every footprint in the sand, a mystery. And every day without casualties was a silent victory. They lived on constant alert. The landscape itself seemed to resist being conquered. The animals didn't fear them. Humans were a novelty. They approached, curious, and that curiosity was lethal. Because humans took advantage of every mistake, every false move, to study, adapt, hunt. They learned to move like the terrain, to disappear into the undergrowth, to imitate the sounds of the wind. Hunting wasn't just about survival. It was about understanding. And the more they understood, the more they controlled. But it wasn't all about hunting. There was also wonder, respect, and connection. Some species weren't hunted. They were offered tobacco, fire, and words. A new spirituality was born, woven between the wild and the human. The gods began to take animal form, and myths began to speak with a marsupial accent. Aboriginal culture didn't emerge in temples, but amidst the red dust and the echoes of impossible creatures. Australia wasn't just a physical challenge, it was a mental one, a land that demanded constant reinvention, where the map of the world was rewritten at every turn and the hunter's logic was put to the test. Surviving there meant opening your mind, being less rigid, more observant, because the creature you don't understand is the one that devours you. But there was an even more cunning, more silent creature, one that hunted not with strength or poison, but with patience. And its arrival would mark the beginning of a new era, the age of deception. While many predators relied on size, speed, or venom, one chose a different path. It didn't roar. It didn't bare its fangs. It didn't need to run. It simply waited. And when it struck, it did so with such precision that its prey didn't understand what had struck it. It was the thylacine, the marsupial wolf, a predator that seemed drawn by nature with a pencil of subtle elegance, with stripes on its back reminiscent of a tiger and a gait that combined the grace of a feline with the tenacity of a dog. The thylacine was a master of stealth. It hunted at night, in pairs or small groups. It stalked without cracking a single branch. Its jaw, capable of opening at incredible angles, allowed it to swallow food without waste. But it wasn't its strength that made it fearsome. It was its method. The humans soon understood that this enemy was different. They didn't hear it coming. They only found footprints, traces of blood, disappearances. In the morning, a child was missing. The next day, a dog. A week later, an entire couple. And silence. Always silence as a backdrop. The thylacine didn't leave grotesque absences. But this predator also provoked something new: systematic persecution. Humans would not tolerate the threat they could not see. They lit fires, built fences, and organized hunts. The creature, though elusive, was gradually losing ground. Each forest cut down, each food source depleted, took away its space. The hunter was hunted, and in this twist, extermination was born. The last known thylacine died alone, locked in a cage. It didn't roar. It simply
didn't fight.
Went extinct. But its disappearance left more than an ecological void. It left a shadow of guilt, because, for the first time, Homo sapiens defeated a beast not out of necessity, but out of fear and arrogance. It was the beginning of a new narrative, that of induced extinction. And even today, in the mist of an Australian morning, there are those who claim to have seen him, walking through the trees, disappearing around the turn of a hill. Perhaps he never left at all. Or perhaps his spirit walks to remind us of something essential, that everything humanity fears to destroy, it first admires. But not all the monsters disappeared. Some still lurked in the shadows, waiting for their moment. And the next would be the oldest of all, the hunter who didn't need teeth, just hunger. Before Homo sapiens had a word for fear, the thing that caused it already existed. It had no defined form. It didn't walk. It didn't hunt in plain sight. It infiltrated. It was invisible. They found it in swollen bodies, in oozing sores, in the fever that consumed the strongest in a matter of days. It was the faceless enemy, disease, a silent killer that left no physical traces, but total devastation. The first epidemics were not recorded in stone, but they left deep marks on oral memory. Entire villages disappeared without a fight. Hunters fell before they had thrown their spears. Children were stillborn or died in the arms of bereaved mothers. No one understood the origin. Some blamed the gods, others the punishment of unclean hunting, others contact with strangers. But the truth was more disturbing. The killer was within. Diseases weren't new, but their spread changed as communities became larger and more sedentary. With sedentarism came the accumulation of waste, prolonged contact with corpses, animals, and stagnant water. And in that primitive broth, microbes emerged, life forms as tiny as they were deadly. Evolution, always impartial, had created an enemy that needed neither strength nor claws, only opportunity. Faced with this threat, humans sought desperate solutions. They invented purification rituals, isolated the sick, and burned bodies without understanding why. And although most of these actions had no scientific basis, some worked. Intuition, born of experience, was the first physician. And each generation added knowledge, error upon error, corpse upon corpse. But the real revolution came with observation. Noticing that certain foods caused discomfort, that certain waters caused illness, that certain practices brought relief, sapiens began to design a primitive medicine. Shamans were the first scientists. Plants were the first laboratories. Every cure was a miracle, every mistake a grave. And yet, for every bacteria discovered, for every poison defeated, another, more lethal, emerged. It was an endless race. Because, like sapiens, microbes also evolved, and that tragic symbiosis shaped human history. There is no empire that hasn't been brought down by a plague. There is no hero who hasn't feared fever. But among so many invisible enemies, one would stand out above all. It wasn't a being. It was an idea, a force that would devastate tribes, languages, landscapes. And it would come from the other side of the world, riding on ships, with pale skin and a conquering gaze. When the first white sails cut across the ocean horizon, the indigenous peoples didn't know they were witnessing the beginning of the end of an era. On the shores, the elders narrowed their eyes, the children hid, the dogs howled. It was something they had never seen before. Enormous wooden canoes that didn't paddle, moving forward like floating specters. From them descended pale figures dressed in strange fabrics, with hard faces and hands heavy with iron. The other had arrived. He wasn't a predator in the natural sense. He had no fangs or claws, but he hunted with a fervor that surpassed that of the fiercest feline. Wherever he went, he left scars, bodies, fires, disease. His presence wasn't just physical. It was cultural, spiritual. His gaze didn't seek to understand. It sought to possess. He measured, he named, he claimed, as if the earth owed him something, as if every tree, every animal, every being belonged to him by divine right. The indigenous peoples tried to understand. Some offered gifts, others watched from afar, but the language was incompatible. Not because of the words, but because of the intentions. The newcomers didn't come to coexist. They came to transform. Their world had no room for multiple truths. And so the imposition began, of customs, of gods, of maps. The fire of the other was cold, his gaze implacable. Epidemics were soon to arrive. Unprecedented diseases spread with deadly speed. Smallpox, measles, influenza. They didn't need soldiers or weapons. A sneeze, a touch was enough. Within weeks, entire villages disappeared. There was no war. There was silence. And that silence hurt more than 1,000 arrows, because you couldn't fight what you didn't understand. Oral accounts began to mutate. The stories spoke of beings who brought death to their skin, who walked in shoes that left no trace, who built houses that didn't breathe with the earth. The local gods became confused. Were they enemies? Were they punishments? Or were they a cruel reflection of what humans could become if they forgot their connection to life? But even in the midst of collapse, resistance wasn't lost. Some fled inland. Others learned to speak the language of the other. They infiltrated, they listened, and when the time came, they struck, not with spears, but with memory. Because culture can hide, but it doesn't surrender. And while one culture was crushed, Another spread like wildfire. But what the conquistadors didn't know is that every seed buried in the shadows can germinate centuries later. Generations passed, but the songs lived on. Even though languages were banned, temples were razed, elders ridiculed, the stories clung to the soul of the people like roots hidden beneath the hard earth. Colonization never completely erased the essence of the ancients, because where there is word, there is resistance. And where there is memory, there is future. Children who grew up on the margins learned in two worlds: the official one, with its alphabet and imported books, and the secret one, where grandparents whispered in their ears with stories that were never written down. These stories held their lineage, the river's true name, the reason for the crow's song, the dance that calls for rain. They weren't just legends, they were maps for survival. Rituals sprouted again like shoots in a burned field, in secret at first, then in clandestine celebrations, and then without asking permission. Because memory doesn't need approval, only space. Cave paintings began to be restored. Dead languages were revived. Grandchildren who had never seen the time of their ancestors now brought it back with pride. But not everything was peaceful. There was physical resistance, guerrilla warfare, sabotage, mass escapes. Men and women who chose to die free in the mountains rather than live chained in labor camps. Names were written in history that books didn't record, but that songs preserved. Because in indigenous culture, heroes don't die. They transform into wind, into rock, into birds. Cities grew, but so did the cracks. And in those cracks, ancient roots found space to infiltrate. Markets filled with Aboriginal symbols. Universities began to study what they had previously despised. The knowledge that had been called primitive revealed itself as sophisticated, profound, and vital. And then, the balance began to tip. Today, the world that tried to erase the ancients is beginning to listen to them, not out of compassion, but out of necessity. Because on a burning planet, they knew how to cool down. In a humanity on the run, they knew how to stop. And in a society that forgets, they teach us how to remember. But memory isn't just a weapon, it's also medicine. And in the next steps, we'll see how healing isn't just about healing bodies, but also spirits. On the silent nights of the Australian outback, when the wind blows like a centuries-old whisper and the moon reflects on the warm stones, the echo of ancient healing chants can still be heard. The Ngangkari, traditional healers of the Aboriginal people, were not just doctors. They were bridges between worlds. They walked between the visible and the invisible. And with their hands, their chants, and their intuition, they brought balance where disorder had entered. They didn't use scalpels or written recipes. They used touch, sight, smoke, the knowledge inherited from generations who listened to the land. They knew which plant could stop a fever, which bark soothed the soul, which stone should be placed on the chest to calm unfounded crying. They didn't just heal the flesh, they healed the brokenness that cannot be seen. Many Westerners ridiculed them at first. They called them superstitious. But over time, even skeptics began to notice. Because where modern medicine failed, the Ngangkari sometimes achieved the impossible. Not because they had magical powers, but because they understood the full context of the body, its environment, its history, its spirit. For the Aboriginal world, illness is not just a physiological anomaly. It's a disruption of harmony. Something has become misaligned with family, with ancestors, with the land. The healer doesn't seek to eradicate symptoms. He seeks to restore bonds, to restore the sick person's place in the invisible fabric of the cosmos. And that is a profoundly political and poetic act. Today, many Ngangkari work alongside modern doctors in Australian hospitals, not to replace them, but to complement them. Because ancient knowledge doesn't compete with the new, it embraces it. And this alliance between science and tradition is one of the greatest revolutions of the present. Healing, finally, has ceased to be a technical act and has once again become a human act. The Naankari don't ask for recognition, only respect. They don't need monuments. Their temples are the body and the desert, and their weapons, listening and singing. They are the thread that never broke, the echo that never faded, the memory that heals. And in that healing, humanity discovers its deepest reflection. Because to move forward, we must first know where we come from. The next thing we see will not be a creature or a myth, but a mirror that will reveal to us who we are. At the heart of every story told around a fire, in every line drawn with ochre on a rock, in every dance performed barefoot on the red earth, lies an essential truth. Human beings need to know where they come from. Not out of nostalgia, but out of meaning. Because without roots, there is no direction. And no one has understood this better than the indigenous peoples of Australia, who have lived since time immemorial with their ears glued to the pulse of the earth. The Aboriginal worldview is not just any mythology. It's a cartography of the soul. In the dream time, everything was created. The rivers, the trees, the stars, but also the rules, the names, the paths. In this ancestral narrative, the past is not behind us. It's here, beating beneath our steps. Time is not measured in centuries, but in stories. And every stone has its own voice. For those born far from this way of thinking, it may seem like a fable. But when you listen carefully, something ignites. Because that connection isn't based on blind faith, but on intimate experience with the environment. The tree isn't just wood, it's an ancestor. The mountain isn't an obstacle, it's a witness. The wind isn't air, it's a message. And the human body, far from being an isolated individual, is a node in an ancient network. This way of seeing the world doesn't seek to dominate, but to engage in dialogue. It doesn't seek to possess the land, but to reciprocate. It doesn't build cities to impose themselves on the landscape, but rather lets the landscape decide where a home should be built. And in doing so, human beings recognize themselves not as masters, but as part of it. That's the mirror, the one that reminds us that we are not the center, but just another thread in the plot. And by looking in that mirror, perhaps we discover what we've forgotten, that wisdom doesn't always come from technology, but from listening. That modernity without memory is blindness disguised as progress. That it's not enough to move forward if, in doing so, we leave behind the essential. Because knowledge isn't only found in laboratories. It also dwells in songs, in footsteps, in the stars. Homo sapiens, who learned to light fires, make tools, navigate oceans, still needs to learn to remember himself, not in mirrors of glass, but in those of history. And each time he achieves this, humanity takes a true step toward fulfillment. But the journey doesn't end with identity, because after knowing ourselves, we must decide what we will do with that knowledge. And there begins the greatest challenge, imagining the future without repeating the mistakes of the past. Humanity has rarely been so close to the brink of the abyss as it is now. Rainforests are falling, oceans are warming, glaciers are wailing their farewells. Technology, instead of offering us solace, often multiplies the noise. And yet, amidst that cacophony, an ancient voice rises. It doesn't shout, it whispers. And in that whisper, it says something we've forgotten, that the earth doesn't need saving. We do. Ancestral peoples never saw themselves as saviors of the world. They saw themselves as part of it. And it is this vision that is urgently needed today, not as a spiritual fad, nor as an exotic postcard, but as a viable model, tested over millennia, of how to inhabit without destroying, how to take without depleting, how to grow without devastating. In their practices there is science, but also poetry, And this fusion is what can save us. The forest fires that ravage continents could be prevented with cultural burnings. The droughts that kill crops could be prevented with knowledge of the roots that store water. The loss of biodiversity could be prevented with the protection of sacred territories. This isn't romanticism. It's practical. It's pragmatism based on respect. Indigenous knowledge isn't a thing of the past. It's a proposal. And the most revealing thing is that this future excludes no one. It doesn't require a return to the past, but rather an integration of it. It doesn't deny science, it complements it. It doesn't reject modernity, it reorients it. Because ancestral wisdom isn't a reaction, it's a guide, a compass in a disoriented world. A gentle song that reminds today's digital hunter that he still has a heart. It's no longer just about studying the past out of fascination. It's about applying it, about sitting with the elders and listening, about rewriting policies with a clan spirit, about redrawing maps that include mountains with true names. Because the future will be collective, or it won't exist at all. And in that collectivity, the voice of the elders is indispensable. Technology can take us far, but if we don't know where, it's useless. And it's there that the people who have known how to live without harming, who have known how to read the earth without the need for satellites, have the last word, and perhaps also the first. Because after so many battles, after so many extinctions, after so much bloodshed, perhaps we have reached the brink not of an end, but of a rebirth. And in that rebirth, we must look back, not to return, but to leap higher. In the beginning, there was fire. Not just the fire of flames, but the fire of knowledge. The fire that lit the first caves, that cooked the flesh, that frightened the beasts. The same fire that centuries later burned books, villages, forests. A fire that saved and destroyed. And now, when everything seems to be burning again, literally and symbolically, humanity returns to the circle, to the edge of the fire, searching for answers in the embers. Stories return, like sparks that never went out, like dry firewood that rekindles with a single breath. In Australia, Africa, America, Asia, indigenous peoples share their fire again, with generosity, with patience, and with pain too, because they know that telling stories is not enough. And that teaching is not enough. We must transform. Today's young people, children of hyperconnectivity, are beginning to discover the value of silence, of ritual, of connection. They are learning to read the landscape as if it were a sacred text, to respect the lunar cycle, the course of the river, the dance of insects, not out of superstition, but out of understanding, because what seemed primitive was, in fact, sophisticated. Fire is now a symbol of alliance, of a shared circle. It is no longer an instrument of domination. It is the bridge between worlds. New ideas are concocted there, prejudices are burned, and common projects are fostered. And its light reaches everyone: indigenous people, scientists, farmers, activists, dreamers. It is a table without borders where everyone fits, but only if they come with respect. And so, what began as a story of fear and hunting, as a struggle for survival in a hostile world, is transformed. Homo sapiens, who once fled from the clutches of the megalania or the leap of the thylacoleo, now flees from himself. And in that burning mirror, perhaps he will find his redemption. Because there is still time, because there is still forest, song, seed, and because there is still fire. Fire to narrate, fire to unite, fire to restart. And so, the story doesn't end. It begins again, because as long as someone listens, as long as someone remembers, the world can still burn with life. Before the written word existed, stones spoke, not with voice, but with shapes, colors, symbols. Every cave, every wall, every rock outcrop was a canvas where ancient people recorded not only hunting scenes or maps of their surroundings, but also profound truths about the world around them. In Australia, those records still endure, alive and breathing beneath the ochre paint that defies time. They are the murals of the eternal elders, the silent witnesses of a history that needs no paper. Cave paintings weren't just decorations. They were pacts. Pacts with the sky, the earth, and the animals. Each figure represented a spirit, an event, a lesson. They were painted in places chosen for their energy, their resonance, their silence. And not everyone could paint them. It was a privilege, a sacred burden. The artists were shamans, guardians of the visual language of the dream gods. For Westerners, these works were long considered primitive. They were dismissed as naive art, as spontaneous expression. But those who dare to study them with humility discover that they are encoded with dazzling complexity. They are layered narratives, where color matters, position matters, even the time of day they are illuminated by sunlight matters. They are like cosmic clocks embedded in rock. Aboriginal spiritual guides teach that these paintings should not only be observed, but also listened to, that each line has a rhythm, that each spiral is a song waiting to be remembered. And when someone truly connects, they don't just see shapes, they see stories in motion. Stories that are not dead, but dormant, and that wait to be awakened with respect. Today, many of these works are threatened by the climate, by industry, by ignorance. They are destroyed, sometimes unwittingly, other times knowingly. But there is also a luminous resistance. Young indigenous artists are restoring them, reinterpreting them, projecting them into new spaces. They are bringing the ancestral language to film, to music, to urban murals, not to turn it into fashion, but to extend its inspiration. Because as long as the language of stones is understood, culture never dies. Because every painted rock is a library without fire, a poem that has yet to say its last word. And because in the stroke of a kangaroo figure, in the pattern of a rainbow serpent, there is more wisdom than any empire has been able to read. But it's not just stones that preserve memory. The body does too. And within it, dance, gesture, movement, tell stories that cannot be expressed in words. Prepare to see with your feet and listen with your chest. On moonless nights in the Australian outback, when everything seems still, there is something that moves to the rhythm of the past, the body. And it is not just any body. It is one that has been prepared since childhood to speak without speaking, to sing without a voice. It is the body of the Aboriginal dancer, who, by touching the earth with bare feet, not only marks the rhythm of a ritual, but reactivates the very history of the universe. Traditional dances are not spectacles. They are living liturgies. Every gesture has a meaning, every leap a consequence. There are dances to call for rain, to bid farewell to the dead, to give thanks for the hunt. There are others that can only be danced by certain lineages, at certain times of the year, under certain stars. Because each body that dances is not alone. It is accompanied by its ancestors, by the beings of the dream, by the invisible forces that order the world. Young people learn by watching. It's not taught with instructions. It's transmitted through presence. Hours, days, years of repeating the same sequence until movement ceases to be imitation and becomes embodied memory. And when that happens, the dancer no longer dances. They are danced. Their body becomes a channel, their sweat, an offering, their silence, a cry. And the most powerful thing, dance doesn't need a stage. It can happen in the middle of the forest, in a secret clearing, on the beach at dawn. The ground is the drum, the wind, the chorus, the body, the instrument. Each dance summons the elements. Each step paints an ancient story in the air. And those who see it, if they know how to look, are not only moved, they are transformed. Over time, some dances have been adapted to modern contexts. They've been performed at festivals, in theaters, in schools. But their essence remains. because it doesn't matter where they're danced, but how and why. And in each instance, the goal is the same: to remember. Not the chronological past, but the spiritual origin, the moment when it all began. Dance, in this sense, is not art. It is continuity. It is the body transformed into prayer. It is a story that is not told, but rather stepped upon, turned upon, and lifted up. And as long as there is a dancer willing to remember with their muscles, the time of the dream will continue to breathe. And after moving with our bodies, it's time to move with our voices. Because if there's one thing that has distinguished Homo sapiens since its origins, it's their ability to tell stories. And stories, as we'll see below, are much more than words. Since the dawn of humanity, the act of storytelling has been as vital as hunting, sleeping, or breathing. In the Aboriginal world, storytellers, sihag, sacred narrators, occupy a central place. They are not simply storytellers. They are custodians of collective memory, bridges between generations, between the invisible and the present. Their voice is not just a narrative. It is a guide, a compass, a medicine. Around the fire, in the vibrant darkness of the night, these storytellers begin. Their voice is deep, slow, full of rhythm. The words are unhurried. Each one falls like a drop that carves stone. They tell how the river was born, why the raven flies alone, what mountain was once a sleeping serpent. They don't seek to entertain. They seek to teach. Each story is a key to understanding the land, the rules, life. Children listen without interrupting. They know that those words carry weight, that they reveal secrets that must not be forgotten. Because if they are forgotten, the world falls into disarray. If they are betrayed, harmony is shattered. Storytellers don't just convey content. They convey tone, rhythm, and perspective. You can't tell just any story in just any way. You have to deserve it. And with each story, something happens. Those who listen are no longer the same. They wake up with a different consciousness because they haven't just heard it, they've been initiated. Stories aren't archived, they become embodied. And in that, the storyteller fulfills their deepest role, ensuring that the past doesn't die, but walks alongside the present. Many of these storytellers faced centuries of imposed silence. They were forbidden to speak their language, to share their stories. But they resisted, some in secret. Others disguised their stories as games, as songs. And when time allowed, they unearthed them like treasures. They retold them more powerfully than ever. Today, in many communities, storytellers are once again taking their place. They are invited to schools, recorded and translated. But even so, there are things that cannot be written down, only spoken. Only transmitted in the cadence of a voice that has listened to its grandfather, that has listened to its own, and so on, back to the beginning. Because as long as there are those who listen, there will be a world. And as long as there are those who speak, humanity will continue to remember why it's here. But one essential piece is still missing. What connects us beyond words? Music. Before there were instruments, there was the voice. And before there were words, there was song. An invisible bridge between the body and the world, between the heart and mystery. For the first peoples of Australia, song is not entertainment. It's a way of navigating the world, of creating it, of sustaining it, of keeping it awake. Songlines are not metaphors. They are maps, alive, sonorous, eternal. Every road, every river, every hill has its song. And that song tells its origin, its journey, its meaning. Singing isn't just remembering, it's activating. If a song isn't sung for generations, that place can fall asleep. It can lose its strength, its soul. This is how the elders understand it. This is how the walkers of song experience it. They don't travel with compasses. They travel with melodies. Each verse is a step, each note a direction. The song doesn't belong to an individual. It belongs to the land. The human being is merely the instrument that emits it. That's why it's transmitted with care, with ritual. Just anything isn't sung in just any place. Each song requires permission from the ancestors, the clan, the land. And by singing it, we honor not only the past, but also the responsibility to maintain balance. Some of these song lines travel thousands of miles. They are inherited from birth. They are memorized not with effort, but with devotion. Because whoever carries a song also carries the memory of creation. And that is more than a privilege. It's a sacred burden. No one improvises. No one invents. It is only remembered. It is relived. Colonization tried to silence them. Literally. It banned their language, their songs, but it couldn't extinguish that primordial vibration, because song doesn't need a stage or a microphone. It only needs body, air, intention. And when you sing well, when you sing with truth, the whole world listens, even if they don't understand with their minds. Today, many songs are heard again at festivals, in schools, and on recordings. But beyond what is audible, the important thing is that they vibrate again. Because if the earth has a heart, its heartbeat is an ancestral song. And whoever hears it, even once, can never forget it. And in the echo of that chant, another sacred art resounds. Body painting. It's not decoration. It's language. It's living history on living skin. And that's where we're headed now. The skin, that organ that covers us, that separates us from the outside world, is also a canvas. And for many indigenous peoples, it is the most sacred of all. Painting isn't about dressing up. It's about declaring oneself. It's about assuming a role, telling a story, claiming a sense of belonging. Aboriginal body painting is an ephemeral but powerful form of writing. Every stroke, every dot, every straight or curved line has a purpose. A root. You can't paint just anything. You can't use just any color. Each pigment has a ritual origin. It's extracted from minerals, bark, ashes. It's mixed with animal fat, with water from specific places. The preparation itself is part of the ritual. The act of painting is slow, solemn. Sometimes you do it yourself. Other times, it's done by someone older than you, with hands that remember how and why it's done. Designs tell of lineages. They indicate territories. They announce moments. One design may signal morning. Another, that one is ready to hunt. Another, that one has reached adulthood. They are more than marks. They are visible pacts. And whoever sees them understands. Because there is a common code, a grammar of symbols that unites all bodies in a web of ancestral meaning. During ceremonies, body painting transforms the individual. It connects them with their totem spirit, with their ancestors, with their place in the cosmos. They are not just themselves. They are all those who came before. They are earth, wind, animal. And in that state, they can dance, sing, heal, and narrate. Paint allows them to cross over to the other side, to be visible to the gods. When the ritual is over, the painting is washed away. It fades, but it doesn't disappear. It remains imprinted in the memory of the body, in the gaze of those who saw it, in the soul of the landscape. Because every ceremony leaves a mark, not in stone, but in spirit. Today, many of these paintings are reborn, not only on skin, but in murals, in contemporary art, in fashion, in performance. But those who wear them with respect know they are not adornment. They are testimony. They are an ancient language speaking in the present. And as long as they continue to be drawn, the time of the dream will live on. And if body paint speaks, there's another instrument that sings without words, the didgeridoo, voice of the earth, voice of the deep. There we will travel now. The sound begins as a hum, long, vibrant, as if the ground itself were breathing. Then it transforms. It ripples. It echoes. It's not wind. It's not thunder. It's the yaidaki, better known as the didgeridoo, a hollow wooden tube that wasn't created, it was discovered. Because, as the wise men say, the yidaki already existed in fallen trees, colonized by termites. You just had to listen for it. Its origins are remote, deeply tied to the Yolngu people of northern Australia. Not everyone can play it. Not at any time. Not with any intention. The yidaki is not a musical instrument, it's a spiritual instrument. By blowing it, the player doesn't just emit a sound. They become a channel, a medium between the visible and the invisible. The technique for playing it, circular breathing, requires years of practice. The sound never stops. It becomes a constant flow, like the river of life. And in that flow, the player empties himself. He stops thinking. He just vibrates. He just lets the wood speak. And what speaks aren't melodies. They're landscapes. They're animals. They're spirits. During ceremonies, the yidaki accompanies dances, songs, and storytelling. It marks the pulse of history, but it also heals. When placed near the chest, its vibration aligns, soothes, and purifies. It is used to alleviate physical and spiritual ailments, not out of superstition, but out of the certainty that the body responds to resonance. Today, the didgeridoo has spread throughout the world. It is played in concerts, in meditations, on electronic recordings, but only those who have heard it in its original context, at dawn, in the middle of the bush, understand its true power. It is not just a sound, it is an ancient voice, a throat of the earth, a call that needs no translation, because when you close your eyes and let its vibrations permeate you, you understand. That music isn't composed, it's heard, and that the earth, when it finds someone who listens, sings. And after the vibration, silence, but not an empty silence, rather, one filled with meaning. In that silence, the farewell is prepared, the moment when everything narrated condenses into a final vision. The sun sets on the horizon as if kissing the earth one last time. The sky burns with fiery hues, and the wind softens as if it knows something sacred is ending. In this moment, there's no need to speak. Just be, observe, breathe. Because what has been told, what has been danced, painted, sung, and played, needs no further explanation, only reverence. Silhouettes are outlined against the light. An elderly storyteller, a child listening, a dancer paused in his final gesture. Painted skin mingles with dust. The echo of the yidaki still vibrates in the chest. Everything comes together. Time, space, body, spirit. And for a moment, it is understood, not with the mind, but with the soul, that the sacred is not in temples, but in connection, in the bond between beings, in deep listening. Homo sapiens, who was born fleeing megalania, who hunted out of necessity, who built empires and destroyed worlds, today sits by the fire. He no longer runs. He no longer dominates. He looks. He is grateful. He understands that surviving was not the end. It was only the beginning. That what matters is not what is conquered, but what is preserved. And in that final sunset, everything experienced becomes a legacy, not as a burden, but as a light that will guide those to come. The grandchildren of the grandchildren, those yet unborn, they too will walk this earth. They too will hear the songs, see the paintings, touch the wood. And if they listen carefully, they will know they are not alone, that there is a history that precedes them, and a responsibility that awaits them. Because this story doesn't belong to one people. It belongs to everyone. It's human, and as such, it's alive. It changes, it adapts, it inspires, but only if it's shared with truth, with respect, with love. And so, the sun sets, but it doesn't go out. It just rests, like a song, like a story. And when you look at the world again, you may not see it the same, because whoever has heard the story of origins can never walk with their eyes closed again. This isn't just a story of the past, it's a compass for the future. It's the memory that burns, that guides, that reminds us of where we came from so we can understand where we're going. We've traveled an epic journey together, from the first trembling steps of our ancestors in a hostile land to the profound awakening of ancestral knowledge that still vibrates beneath our feet. And now, at the end of this journey, it's not about saying goodbye, but about deciding what we'll do with everything we've learned. Perhaps, after hearing this story, you'll look at your surroundings with different eyes. Perhaps you'll understand that every rock has something to say, that every river remembers, that every elder is an open book, and that in every silence of the earth, there's a song waiting to be heard. This is an invitation to reconnect, to relearn, to respect, and above all, to never forget. If this story touched you, if it made you think, feel, remember, or imagine, don't leave it here. Take it with you. Share it. Circulate it. Knowledge that isn't shared withers. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapters of this great human narrative. Activate notifications and join us for upcoming stories that reveal who we are, who we were, and what we can still be. Leave us your comment. We want to know which part of this trip moved you the most. What image stayed with you? What lesson will you take with you? Your voice is part of this circle, and your every word is also a spark that ignites the fire of collective memory. And if you want to be an active part of this reconnection mission, share this video with someone who needs a reminder that there's a world beyond the noise, a world woven with song, with earth, with connection. This channel doesn't just tell stories, it builds bridges. Thank you for being here, for listening with an open heart, for walking with us along this path of shadow and light. What we've shared never ends. It only transforms, like fire, like time, like us. See you soon. And remember, as long as someone listens, the story lives on. And as long as we're together, the fire never goes out.